Before I kickstart my review, I would just like to apologize for something. In my previous video, I stated that I wasn't going to buy Hinokami Chronicles 2 on Steam because I'd already pre-ordered the PS5 copy from Japan. However, there was something that I failed to take into account. You see, a lot of people have been treating this game as if it were a Sega game, but in all actuality, the game's actual publisher is Aniplex. Now, Aniplex, at least for the case of this game, is primarily publishing it in Japan, and for distributing the game overseas, they task Sega to do that. But what this essentially means is that if you buy a copy of the game from Japan, they did not bother to add any other language other than Japanese. Now don't get me wrong, I've played Japanese only games in the past. Don't get the impression that I wouldn't be willing to do that here. However, let's just say that in this case, I want to maximize my experience, which includes fully understanding what the characters are saying. So because of that, I swallowed my pride and my wallet and bought the Steam copy. I mean, I was gonna do it eventually, so, it was only just a matter of time. Anyway, as per tradition, my main focus when reviewing the CyberConnect 2 games is my experience playing the story mode. But much like before, I will briefly share my thoughts on the game. The best description that I can give is that it's overall a pretty good game, but a bare bones sequel. It meets the bare minimum criteria for being classified as a sequel, as it has more characters, it continues the story of the previous game, and it features both balance and mechanical changes. However, this feels like an old school video game, which is not actually a bad thing, and I'll explain later in the video why it's actually for the game's benefit. But in this area, I would say that it kind of holds the game back because it's competing against games from today that have longer lifespans and are constantly reinventing their gameplay in order to keep it fresh and apply balance changes as they keep releasing new content and foster an ongoing community. Dragon Ball FighterZ from 2018 is not the same as Dragon Ball FighterZ from today. So much has been revamped, with some of those changes honestly being comparable to the changes we're seeing here in Demon Slayer. Hinokami Chronicles takes the traditional route of resolving much of the future changes to a sequel game. But when you look at what they've changed in general, they're comparable to what you would see in system overhauls in modern live service games. We're not witnessing any big killer app features, and while that doesn't detract from the fun you have playing this game, it definitely does make you wish for more. With that said, I do like a lot of the changes, my two favorite ones being the enhanced switch, which is reminiscent to the character switch in Storm 4 during an auto combo in which your support character will switch by dashing to the opponent, and when you do that, the combo timer will slightly increase, which is a good thing. And also with the heavy attack changing the command input from light attack tilts to pressing R1 and circle simultaneously. This is a really good change, not only because it reduces the amount of misinputs, but it also allows you to do a heavy attack mid-combo more easily. In the past, there were only a few characters that could easily combo into a heavy attack, as they had to have a specific skill that had a long enough stun effect, but in this game you can even cancel your normals into a heavy attack. It does have a meter cost, but it's a refreshing change. It almost feels like a fourth skill in a way. This and enhanced switch will expand on the combo possibilities with a lot of characters, which is something that I really value. Also, if you charge your heavies, it will allow you to travel into the opponent from long distances, so this might be a useful tool in situation where you combo a skill into a support attack that launches the opponent into a distance, although doing this will cost even more meters, so it likely won't be very practical in a lot of instances. There are a bunch of other changes that you will find while playing this game, more than I will cover in this video, and I do expect a lot of this to contribute to a big change in the game's meta. Honestly, just wait until the Korean players start to really master this game and we might end up witnessing some magic. However, despite all of this, a part of me does still wish we would see bigger overhauls. I guess the one thing I will say about this game relative to Storm Connections, which has a similar problem, is that at least with Hinokami Chronicles, it already had a pretty good baseline for competitive play, so them not changing much of the fundamentals isn't as detrimental as Storm, which is a series that I do think has a lot of room for system revamps that I would argue desperately needs. Also, as a side note, I haven't been able to verify this, but I did hear that this game runs at 60 FPS on 8th generation consoles. I'm gonna have to dig this a bit more at a later time because this is quite interesting. Also, this game works well on Linux. Like, day one, this shit was popping off. It even runs well on the Steam Deck, to the point where I'm compelled to do some additional investigation because it's possible this game might actually run better than the first game, but I'll look into that later. Today I want to focus primarily on the story mode. Speaking of which, the story mode. I enjoyed it. You know, it was crazy playing this after the disastrous story campaign of Storm Connections. Somehow Aniplex understands the main appeal of CC2 games, more than Bandai Namco, the publisher that has been with CC2 since the early 2000s. Now, one thing I do want to make it clear is that regardless of what I may say in this video, I don't want to give the impression that Hinokami Chronicles 2 is a replacement to the original material. While it is tempting to say that given the amount of depth they went when adapting the original material, I have not and will never advocate that practice. Video game adaptations of manga and anime materials will always have missing context, altered content, and there are some things that the visual art of animation is able to deliver that video games, especially on the scale of anime games, just isn't able to. This is no longer the Ultimate Ninja Storm days when the Naruto anime had sluggish pacing and filler content that may have discouraged some people from wanting to continue watching the anime and felt like the video games were a more digestible way of experiencing the Naruto story. Now, in my opinion, I think you're just better off reading the manga, but regardless, I don't think there's any good reason to pick the Hinokami Chronicle games over the anime. If you're interested in watching Demon Slayer, just go watch the anime. Ufotable killed it with that adaptation. To me, Hinokami Chronicles is less of a replacement to the original material, but instead a different way of experiencing the story. They don't have to be mutually exclusive. In fact, I would argue that you will better appreciate the game if you've watched the anime. Now, me personally, one thing that I really want to give credit to this game for is the open world. Now, if you've watched my previous videos, you will know that I've not been very happy with the direction of the open worlds in recent Naruto games. I mean, with Storm 1, life was somewhat Gucci. Granted, there were some areas where I did feel like it was a downgrade from the PS2 Ultimate Ninja games, but it did feel like a lively open world adaptation of Konoha that allowed you to do a lot of dumb shit, jumping around, climbing buildings, had its fair share of minigames. It was nice. Then came Storm 2, in which they completely discarded all of that. Many areas had fixed cameras, the movements became more limited, you could no longer double jump or run, the paths were more linear. It was very clear that they were not interested in creating a compelling open world, and this design approach was carried into Storm 3. Now in Storm 4, Konoha did look better and richer, but beyond that, not much improved. In fact, it got worse. There were no longer travel paths from one area to another, the movements became even more limited since you could no longer jump, and then in Storm Connections, they took it to a next level. They just outright removed the open world. And yes, they removed it. It's not that they didn't include it in the first place, no, they removed it. There are very obvious signs that this game was meant to have an open world, but for some fucking reason during the production, they decided to just discard it completely. So, yeah, thanks. I guess if you don't have something to show for, no one can technically criticize your fuck-ups. Now, the first Hinokami Chronicles approached open world explorations in a different way. You see, with the mainline Storm games, you can explore the worlds outside of the main story mode. In fact, with Storm 4, the main story mode isn't even tied to any open world, and that's mainly reserved to Adventure mode and the Road to Boruto expansion. However, with Demon Slayer, there is no equivalent to a free roam. The game is divided by chapters, and they typically have a small scale world in which you navigate from one spot to the other in order to advance the story. There's not really much that you can do, but that's kind of the point. The story mode in Demon Slayer is very linear. The most that you can do outside of the main plot is collecting items and having brief interactions with some NPCs as part of the side tasks. The movements are pretty limited. If you have to either jump or slide through a tunnel, it does it automatically when you approach the checkpoint. The most interesting aspect of these rendered worlds is that sometimes there are certain items or even checkpoints that are located in obscure locations that you sometimes need to decipher the correct path in order to get there, almost as if it were a mini maze, which was amusing in and of itself, but beyond that, you're not really playing that good of an open world exploration. In general, I would say it's more fun to navigate compared to Storm 4 because of the maze element, but it was much more stripped down in terms of the free roaming, if you even want to call it that, because it wasn't like it had a big map connecting all the areas that you can explore outside of the respective chapters. Now, Hinokami Chronicles 2 has a similar design approach, but the roaming is a lot better. For starters, the player movements are a lot less restricted than in the previous game. This time, you actually can jump and run faster. Now, with the running thing, I think it will especially be useful for speedrunners, but even just for average play, it's great to be able to reach destinations at a faster pace than before. It also makes jumping more interesting, as in this game, the extent to which you can jump isn't just limited to rocks, fallen trees, or disproportionate mountain in areas, you can also climb buildings as well as jumping from one rooftop to another. Now, I do want to point out that this game will only let you climb in specific spots, and it will usually tell you if you're able to do it by showing a blue line on the edge. If you don't see a blue line, even if you think you're able to jump, you're just not gonna. Additionally, at first when I started exploring the jumping mechanic, I noticed that I would constantly fall while trying to jump from one rooftop to another, and initially I was having a hard time understanding why, but eventually I figured out. Essentially, this game, when you're not stepping on land, it will lock to a falling animation. Now the thing is, I have this habit with platformer games of jumping right before I fall, which isn't a strategy that's going to fully work in this game. Even if you're slightly off land, it will lock to a falling animation and you won't be able to jump beyond that. So I do still think the game has inferior platforming appeal compared to the PS2 Ultimate Ninja games. In fact, with those games, you can even double jump, which is not something that you can do here. Another thing that you also don't have is random encounters, which is funny because this is something that even the first game had. Well, sort of. You see, Hinokami Chronicles 1 does have instances where you encounter a random demon while traveling, but I would hardly count them as random encounters. If anything, they're scripted. Traditional random encounters usually involve you exploring a certain area and there are scattered enemies that may attack you, which isn't exactly the case with Hinokami 1. It does have random demons that could attack you while you're playing through the story, but they're scripted. If you explore the exact same area after a second playthrough, you will find the exact same demon in the exact same spot, and after beating the enemies, you're not gonna find them anymore. Now, Hinokami 2 doesn't have that, but one thing they do have is more fleshed out side missions. In the first game, side missions, you could barely even call them that. They really weren't anything special beyond going to the blue exclamation marks and either collecting items or clicking through 2 to 4 dialogue bubbles. However, in Hinokami 2, the side missions are a little more eventful. There's much more extensive dialogue. It may be required you to move to certain points, use your unique character traits that may be useful. Tanjiro has a borderline busted sense of smell where you can even smell emotions, which can sometimes be required in order to deduce which of the multiple characters spread throughout the map may be the one that you're supposed to find. Inosuke has massive spatial awareness, while Zenitsu has enhanced hearing, both of which can also be useful for completing side missions, although not as frequently as Tanjiro. There are also certain side quests that involve exploring a different area in order to kill a demon, and this is probably the closest to a replacement to the removed random encounters from Hinokami 1. And in the game's defense, I do find these demon encounters doing side missions to be more interesting. Mainly because in the first game, it was very common for you to fight the exact same demon multiple times, but in Hinokami 2, they did more to diversify the demons. In fact, they even went as far to make some of their powers relevant to the plot of the side mission. For instance, one of them was about tasking Inosuke to hunt a specific demon, mainly due to the fact that in the Entertainment District arc, it was presumed based on the recollection of the events that Inosuke had some degree of immunity towards poison. So he was tasked with defeating a demon who had strong poison abilities, and boy, I was not expecting just how aggressive the poison would be. Like, I was expecting something similar to what Shinobu or Gyutaro lash out as far as poison attacks, but nah, this demon took it to the next level, and I really appreciate it. In fact, one of the things that has made me kind of prefer the story mode in the first Hinokami Chronicles game over the Storm games is the fact that every boss battle, actually no, not even just boss battle, every battle in general that you experience is the one that is replicable in free battle. This is something that is common even in other fighting games in which the story campaigns tend to be relegated to standard CPU matches. Storm has always stood above most fighting games due to the fact that they also provide unique boss battles as well as dialogue during the standard matches ever since Storm 3. But Hinokami has taken this to a next level by giving even the most irrelevant battles some armored attacks. There's this side mission that involves Inosuke fighting against Murata, and even this match had consecutive armored attacks that you had to tactfully dodge or parry, unlike what you would usually experience in free battle matches, which I really like. With that said, I do still wish this game had more side quests. In fact, I'm just gonna say right now, when I played this game from start to finish, it legitimately felt like a blast from the past. In recent years, it feels like anime games have been steering more towards the live service model, especially with gacha shit. Playing Hinokami 2 reminded me a lot of the PS2 Ultimate Ninja days back when you accumulated points that could allow you to purchase a variety of things, which in this case could include character attires, ultimates, fully playable characters. The game also has a few mini games, my favorite one being the shamisen rhythm game because of how cartoony and expressive the characters look as Zenitsu gets more aggressive with his instrument. This feels reminiscent to an era in which anime fighting games tried to provide both a fun multiplayer, whether it was online or offline, and also wanted to give the players an exciting story campaign that lets you explore the game beyond just free battle. I remember when I first played Ultimate Ninja 5, me and my brother primarily bought it to duke it out in free battle, but when we checked the story mode, it felt like we were exploring a whole different side of the game, in which we explored Konoha, the Land of the Waves, the Sand Village, Tenchi Bridge. There was an entirely different combat system doing random encounters, you could even level up your characters, there was a sea of side missions and fully voiced NPC interactions that you could explore. Demon Slayer Hinokami Chronicles 2 reminds me a lot of that, so I can't help but crave a bit more from this game. If the game had random encounters, a full-blown free roam with all of the areas available to explore, and more side missions which could also include ongoing storylines, that would make this game just perfect. It's not that I necessarily begrudge the game for not having all of that, it's just that looking at how many steps forward they took compared to the first game as far as side quests, as well as compared to the Storm games as far as the character movements, I just feel like I know they can achieve wonders. In fact, I think my favorite side mission in this game was one where Zenitsu was tasked to defeat a demon, and on his way he found a tailor who lost his material for a uniform, and Zenitsu instantly agreed to help finding it after the tailor hyped it up for how racist the design for his upcoming outfit would be. It was a funny storyline, fell in line with the character traits, and it's one of those things that you can only experience in this game. That aside, the game reintroduces mob battles. It's only in a few missions, but compared to the first game, in which aside from the swamp demons and one of the spider demons, which I hesitate to even include these as examples, you will hardly find many battles that involve you fighting against a swarm of enemies. Hinokami Chronicles 2 brought this back during the Swordsmith Village arc, and I gotta say, I don't think I need to reinforce the fact that CC2 are kings of cel-shaded graphics, we all know that. But the way they designed the giant fish demons was unlike anything I've seen them do in the past. In the anime, they look pretty creepy because of the uncanny CGI, and they were able to replicate that aesthetic in this game, which was marvelous. I was honestly enthralled from beginning to end. I could not let go of my controller. I don't know how they're able to have a consistent team that provides back-to-back visual bangers, but CyberConnect 2 just keep doing it again and again. I've seen some say that this is indistinguishable from the anime. I'm just gonna say it right now. I don't think any of the animation sequences in this game match the climax in the Entertainment District arc from the anime, but I will say it does a terrifying job keeping up. My only real complaint, and this is a problem I had with the first game, is that I personally believe CC2 was at their best when they had quick time events mid-boss and at the end. With the way the game is designed currently, you only get quick time events after you've already defeated the boss. At this point, I'm not even complaining about the fact that the game doesn't punish you for failing the Q2E inputs. I've long moved on from that. I've accepted the fact that for whatever reason CC2 has chosen to babify their Q2Es, whatever. However, I still believe that having quick time events in the middle of the boss battles was such an iconic aspect of the Storm legacy. It made them feel more cinematic, it gave them opportunities to animate game original cutscenes. Those truly were the golden days. I'm willing to excuse these Demon Slayer games mainly due to the fact that the opponents lash out a multitude of unique attacks that makes those matches feel eventful regardless of the quick time events. It's just one of those things where I won't stop complaining because those truly were great times. Now the last thing I do want to mention is that the game ended on a cliffhanger. It ends right before the Infinity Castle arc. Now here's the thing, this arc, while it is the biggest one as far as the number of chapters, the amount of content wouldn't be comparable to how much material both the first and the second game have covered individually. If Aniplex made a third game based on this arc alone, it would be the shortest story campaign we've seen from them, and frankly, unless they do something really crazy with the combat system and add a random characters from previous arcs to fill in the roster, if I'm already complaining that this game feels like an underwhelming sequel, the third game would be even worse. Hinokami Chronicles 2, despite me expecting more from the combat system, The story mode is great, it's actually a great sequel, and I still hold the stance that this is in large what makes me want to buy these games. So because of that, as much as it pains me to say this, because I really don't like DLC, if Aniplex and CyberConnect 2 really want to adapt the Infinity Castle arc, they'll probably have to release it as an expansion pack. If they do this, I do at least hope that they consider re-releasing the game again, mainly on a physical disc as an Ultimate Edition containing all the DLC content. I don't think that's what they're gonna do because unfortunately this practice has been dying. I recently had the displeasure of buying Street Fighter 6 Years 1 to 2 Fighters Edition, in which all it has is a physical copy with the original version 1 build, and all of the season pass content is relegated to a product key that you have to redeem on the PlayStation Store and download it. So even when they do release these Ultimate Editions, they still fuck up. I don't know if I have enough faith in Aniplex to give us something similar to Stormfall Road to Boruto, in which they actually do include all the content on the disc, including the DLC content. But if I had to wish for something, it would be this. Now look, listen, Aniplex, you're owned by Sony, right? Sony owns the Blu-ray Disc Association. You guys are getting some of the royalty cuts. Please consider re-releasing this game again with all the DLC content included if you decide to release the Infinity Castle arc as an expansion. Anyway, in summary, I rank the story mode in this game above Hinokami Chronicles 1, and as far as my general recommendation, if you're hungry for a competitive arena fighter, it might be worth considering buying this game. I've always had the opinion that Hinokami Chronicles, even the first game, is possibly one of the best, if not the best, arena fighter out there that you can buy if you want to take it seriously as a competitive game, although I would advise you to wait for a sale. I still believe the game would be better off as a $50 game, but I do think the game is good. I guess I could say that my excitement for CyberConnect 2 has been revived just a little bit. In fact, I actually have some additional topics that I want to cover regarding this game, but that will be for a future time. Anyway, that's all I have to share. Bandai Namco, take notes from Aniplex.